Hello everybody. Thanks again for visiting my YouTube channel. Here's the place where we discuss the Lord's Recovery Movement of Witness Lee, also known as the local church movement. Okay, so we've had a couple of episodes where I've pulled back into a more general view and am exploring the Lord's Recovery from a more general secular view, and that's viewing it in the light of what it is generally, not religiously. It is a controlling group with the characteristics of what is called a cult. Now, a lot of things can be a cult. A family can be a cult. A relationship between a boyfriend and a girlfriend can be a cult. What we're talking about when we say cult has a lot less to do with the doctrines of the group, whether they are heretical or not, and have more to do with how the group dynamics work in the realm of one individual or one group of individuals controlling the behavior of other individuals. If you've got a family with a narcissistic leader, maybe a father figure who is way, way extreme in his authoritarianism and his psychological manipulation and games, that can be a cult. A boyfriend can be that way with his girlfriend. Just about any group can show characteristics of a high control group, what Steve Hassan now calls undue influence. He said he's moving away from the phrase mind control and is starting to use the phrase undue influence, which basically means somebody's gotten too big for their britches and is controlling somebody else in an undue way. Something about human psychology allows this to happen. We can be manipulated by others, be controlled by them. Hassan has this diagram, which I'd like to put up now, which is the influence continuum from the bite model, and it shows the view from healthy groups and relationships and individuals and leaders on the left and unhealthy on the right. Constructive and healthy on the left, destructive, unhealthy on the right. The first row on the top, it says for individuals. This is talking about the members of the group. These characteristics on the left are healthy characteristics, and on the right are unhealthy characteristics. As we go through these, let's think about how this applies to the Lord's Recovery and our experience there. First one is authentic self versus false cult identity. Now, what happens a lot of times with these groups is when you join, you have a very quick personality change to become a new person. Often your family and friends have a hard time recognizing you because you've changed so quickly. That kind of change is often unhealthy. One thing that we should believe is that God allows us to be our true self, and that the group should not mold our identity. The second one is unconditional love versus conditional love. Unconditional love means you're accepted for who you are. Conditional love means you're accepted if you conform to the group. We've all experienced the shunning that happens in the Lord's Recovery if you don't conform. And eventually things like quarantining and excommunication can happen if you don't conform. Compassion versus hate. There's really kind of a cold-hearted attitude in the Lord's Recovery. They see people as a means to an end. They don't see people's problems as anything that's that important. What's really important is that you are sacrificing yourself for the purpose of the group. Conscience versus doctrine. We've seen this too. Conscience is your inner voice. Doctrine is what the Lord's Recovery tells you to believe. And I've said it before. Ron Kangs' view that John Ingalls was obsessed because his conscience went against Witness Lee's directives led Ron to say John Ingalls was obsessed. He didn't respect John's conscience. Creativity and humor versus solemnity, fear, and guilt. Well, we've seen this. Aren't Lord's Recovery leaders, when they speak, some of the most boring speakers you've ever heard? They have very little sense of humor. They take themselves way too seriously. They all put on this fake gravity like they're imitating Witness Lee or what they imagine Watchman Nee to be. It's almost scary to watch. There's no genuine identity there, or very little genuine identity. They all seem to be imitating this ideal of a brother, which is some kind of amalgam of Watchman Nee and Witness Lee, or what they imagine it to be, I would think. And then free will and critical thinking versus dependency and obedience. Free will critical thinking means you get to make up your own mind. You get to think. And I've talked about that. Free will is you trust your inner voice. Critical thinking is you have the right to scrutinize things. Dependency says you look to them for direction, and then obedience means you do what they say. Okay, down to the middle row, now we're talking about the leaders themselves. A healthy leader in a healthy group, he's psychologically healthy. In a controlling group, they tend to be narcissistic or even psychopathic. It's very possible that Witness Lee had a major mental problem. The things he said about himself, he was definitely narcissistic. Talking about being the minister of the age and talking about having the oracle of God and yelling and insisting and demanding people revere him. And then just the whole model of deputy authority that they wield around today, talking about they expect people to believe they're deputy authorities and things like that. Well, where do they get that? What makes them think they're deputy authorities? Why are they so hung up on authority? I think probably the word right there on the screen, narcissistic, explains a lot. When you start getting hung up about you being a big shot and the big boss, probably a little too hung up on yourself. A healthy leader knows his own limits. A elitist leader is grandiose, and I can't think of anybody who acts more grandiose than the Lord's Recovery leaders. A healthy leader empowers the people he is leading. The unhealthy leader, destructive leader, is power hungry. They're about control. I would say the Lord's Recovery leaders do the opposite of empowering. Empowering means you equip people to do things on their own. The Lord's Recovery doesn't want to empower people to do anything. Empowering means they don't need you anymore. Well, that's the last thing they want. A healthy leader is trustworthy. A unhealthy leader is secretive and deceptive. A healthy leader is accountable, and an unhealthy leader is above accountability, which describes the Lord's Recovery leaders to a T. They don't have any accountability. They are their own accountability. Okay, moving down to the last row, this is talking about the group itself and relationships in the group. Egalitarianism, that means there's equality. Elitism means there's levels of honor. Whatever they say, calling these guys brother this and brother that. When the leaders may give messages, they talk about the brothers. And they're talking about this small subset of leading ones. Well, then the brothers mean something different. They call themselves brothers, but really the brothers is special brothers. That's elitism. Checks and balances, that means that power isn't any small group or one person's hands versus an authoritarian structure. We all know how the Lord's Recovery works there. Informed consent versus deceptive and manipulative. There you go. The Lord's Recovery does not really care about the consent of the saints about much of anything. Individuality and diversity versus clones people. You're expected to conform to the image of a good brother and a good sister in the Lord's Recovery. They don't think much of either individuality or diversity. As a matter of fact, I've heard messages condemning individuality. Well, didn't God make us all different? Why did he make us all different? Just so we would all become the same? Why would he do that? What's the point of that? Didn't he make millions of kinds of flowers and millions of types of birds and insects and trees and animals? There's all kinds of diversity in creation. All these different colors. There's diversity. God doesn't have a problem with diversity. It glorifies him. Moving down, the means create the end versus the end justifies the means. That means on the left, if it's healthy, they do things the right way. On the right, in the unhealthy, destructive side, they do whatever works to accomplish their end. A healthy relationship or organization encourages growth of the members and individual. This means growing as you were meant to grow. A unhealthy group preserves its own power. If they branch out with a new church or meeting place, they are going to make sure they maintain power over that. They will not give that group any freedom. And then at the very end, in a healthy group or relationship, you are free to leave. And in an unhealthy, destructive one, there are no legitimate reasons to leave. And that's the Lord's Recovery to a T. So you can see this. So according to this model, and this was not built with the Lord's Recovery in mind. This was not compiled and constructed and designed with the Lord's Recovery in mind. It was formed by studying many, many, many different types of groups and how they interact and the dynamics of the group. And the characteristics on the right are destructive and unhealthy, and the ones on the left are constructive and healthy. Now you be the judge. Which column most resembles the Lord's recovery? It's got to be the one on the right. The consensus is that's unhealthy. So whatever the Lord's recovery says about itself, the judgment of this model and of the experts in undue influence and group mind control would disagree. This is just some more general knowledge about this dynamic. And the more and more I get into this, the more and more I'm convinced that the Lord's recovery is a destructive, controlling, abusive group. For whatever other good they did, it doesn't matter. All groups have their positive side, or people would go running, kicking, and screaming. They got to have something to attract people. One thing Steve Hassan said was, looking at your situation right now, what you thought the group was when you came in and what it is now, would you join the group like you did originally? If the answer is no way, then you are under undue influence if you're still in the group. That's the bottom line of all this. So that's it for this episode. Thanks again for listening. Take care.